Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so I think we'll get started. Welcome everybody to the 2020 Maine Hunger Dialogue. I'm Rebecca Long. I'm one of your moderators. I'm from University of Maine, and behind the scenes we have Pamela Hargest, also from University of Maine, working Zoom magic. A couple things to get out of the way. If you have any questions, technical issues, anything, please use the Q&A function. It should be at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or if you're on a phone, you may have to click three dots to get to it. You can use that to ask the speakers questions or to let us know if you're having any issues. We'll be talking about a lot of resources today, but don't be stressed about keeping track of all of them. They'll be posted on the website sometime pretty soon. Okay, I'm going to introduce our first speaker who's going to welcome all of us, Frank Wertheim. He's an educator for the University of Maine, where he has been working to address food insecurity, help farmers and home gardeners for over 30 years. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Becca, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 2020 Maine Hunger Dialogue. My name is Frank Wertheim, and I'm an agriculture extension educator with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. My work entails providing university-based research programs and information in support of our Maine farming community, our home gardeners, and for the statewide Maine Master Gardener Volunteer Program. As Becca said, for more than 30 years of my career, I've also been able to focus on food insecurity issues, mostly through our Maine Harvest for Hunger program, which began more than 20 years ago. Unfortunately, over those 20 years, I've seen a fairly steady increase in hunger amongst Maine people from all walks of life, including children, seniors, the working poor, those living in chronic poverty, and those who have found themselves newly food insecure during COVID-19. Today, we are so pleased to have well over 100 registrants joining us from across Maine's colleges and universities, members of the general public, as well as people from across the US. And we even have a few friends joining us from the East African nation of Tanzania. To my friends in Tanzania, I say, karibu sana, welcome. It's been a long road for our planning team. Originally, this event was scheduled to be held in person at the University of Maine's Farmington campus. Because of the pandemic, by April of this year, we came to the realization that an in-person event was not going to be possible. However, our planning committee was committed to the idea of engaging student activists to fight food insecurity. We never gave up. Our teams worked tirelessly to bring this webinar to you today. I'm eternally grateful to all of them and wish to acknowledge my fellow committee members. Sally Slavinsky of the Maine Campus Compact, my colleague Kathy Savoy, also from the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, Shirley Rush of the University of Maine Presque Isle, Kim McKeague of Husson University, and Amy Carrington from the University of Southern Maine's Food Studies program. All of us have gone through some dark times during this unsettling period we find ourselves in today. Together, united against hunger, we hold each other up and keep moving forward in support of our local and global community. Please let me give you a brief history of our journey to today, the 2020 Maine Hunger Dialogue, and then we will proceed with our program. The first Maine Hunger Dialogue was held at the University of Maine in Orono in 2014. As I mentioned, it grew out of the work of Maine Harvest for Hunger. Since we began in 2000, the Harvest for Hunger program has engaged Maine's farming community, our Master Gardener volunteers, community gardeners, and the general public. Through Maine Harvest for Hunger, we've been able to grow, glean, and donate more than 3 million pounds of fresh produce to food pantries throughout Maine over those 20 years. I invite you to visit the resource page of the Maine Hunger Dialogue website to learn more about Maine Harvest for Hunger. Through that work, fighting food insecurity, I learned of an organization called Universities Fighting World Hunger. This organization is a grassroots coalition of hundreds of universities from across the US and the world. It is supported by the World Food Program, and it is hosted at Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama. Annually, they bring together college students, faculty, staff, administrators, and people from hunger fighting agencies from around the world. I attended my first university's Fighting World Hunger Summit in 2010. I was deeply moved and inspired by the incredible work of young and some not so young student activist hunger warriors who were actively engaged in creative and low-cost program solutions fighting hunger and poverty around the globe. The energy of that summit was and remains contagious. Again, I invite you to visit the resource page of the Maine Hunger Dialogue website to learn more about how your campus can join the amazing and dedicated coalition of universities fighting world hunger. It was there in 2014 at the first, it was there at attending Universities Fighting World Hunger Summits that I first learned of state hunger dialogues, which at the time had begun happening in both Kansas and North Carolina. As I returned to the annual summits for ideas and inspiration in 2012, summit coordinators challenged me and our UMaine Cooperative Extension staff to launch our own statewide Maine Hunger Dialogue. We took up that challenge and joined with Sally Slavinsky, director of the Maine Campus Compact, and her dedicated VISTA volunteers. Together, we recruited 85 college and university students from 18 institutions to host the first Maine Hunger Dialogue in 2014. Since then, we've continued to host the Maine Hunger Dialogue and been able to engage students and be inspired by hundreds of Maine college and university students, faculty, and staff across the state. Together, we've been able to create a collaborative network addressing food insecurity amongst Maine's institutions of higher learning. We on our planning team truly believe that Maine college students are caring and compassionate individuals. You are today's activists and you are tomorrow's leaders. It is you who will help solve the problem of hunger in Maine and bring the fight against food insecurity across our country and in places as far away as Tanzania. The goal of the Maine Hunger Dialogue is to inspire students from the state's public and private universities and colleges, including community colleges, to learn, share ideas, network, and work together to fight hunger across Maine and across the globe. As we close today, I will talk about our grant initiative, which we hope will make this more of a year-round event rather than a one-time thing. Thanks to the generous sponsorship from Sodexo Maine, Bangor Savings Bank, the Maine 4-H Foundation, and the University of Maine Foundation, we've been able to offer a grant program following each Maine Hunger Dialogue, so we could continue to support student engagement to address food insecurity on campuses and in our communities across Maine and continue our collaboration on a year-round basis. I will end with a story that segues into our next segment. At that first Maine Hunger Dialogue in 2014, I had an epiphany. I was shocked by the high number of food insecure students who attended that year from campuses across Maine. I was equally shocked when the majority of the grants we funded that year were aimed at fighting student hunger on campuses. I had truly believed that the majority of the projects we would fund would have been focused on hunger in communities surrounding the campuses. That experience inspired Sally Slavinsky and me to initiate what we believe is the first statewide food and housing insecurity study amongst Maine colleges and university students. With sponsorship from Good Shepherd Food Bank and Sodexo Maine, supported by dedicated VISTA volunteers, we were able to conduct this study. At that time, college student food insecurity was a rising and mostly hidden problem that still had not been adequately, and today still has not been adequately addressed at our schools and across our nation. A number of studies have now documented high rates of food insecurity exists amongst college and university students across the US. I would like to acknowledge these amazing VISTA volunteers without whom this study would not have been possible. A deep appreciation goes out to Tom Gallant, Heaven Riendu, Katie Cracked, and Sumaya El Khalidi. Through their hard work, we were able to survey more than 1,700 college students from 24 unique Maine campuses to conduct this food and housing insecurity study across Maine's institutions of higher learning. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn the presentation over to Sally.
And so, Sally, while you start sharing your screen, I'm going to introduce you and Kim. So our next two speakers are Sally Slavinsky and Kim McKee. Sally Slavinsky is Executive Director of the Maine Campus Compact, where she works with Maine Campus Compact's 18 Maine-based member campuses on civic engagement initiatives. And after her, Kim will be speaking. Kim is the Associate Professor of Mathematics and Data Analytics at Husson University. She's worked on food insecurity and food assistance for over 10 years, most recently in higher ed in Minnesota and Maine. I think, unfortunately, Sally, it sounds like we can't really hear you very well. Yeah, and Kim, do you want to share your slides too?
Can you see them?
No, can't see them yet.
Okay, thought I hit the slide sharing. Share screen, this one, share, got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, and if you just want to go into presenter mode, we should be.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and I can take these.
Looks good, thanks.
So thank you to the Campus Compact, the VISTA program, and the University of Maine Cooperative Extension for getting me involved in this project, which they worked very hard on, looking at food and housing insecurity for students through a statewide campus survey. And to give you a little bit of background, they have been working on this since 2014, as Frank said, and realized that hunger was impacting our students and campuses. The Wisconsin Hope Lab very aptly said students who have grown up in poverty do not suddenly become wealthier when they enroll in college. We've seen a growing problem and awareness of the problem on college campuses, that students are coming from situations with declining family incomes, and there have been decreases in financial aid while college costs have been rising, and we've seen an increasing number of non-traditional students, meaning students who come from backgrounds where they don't bring as many financial resources to their college experience. And now we have COVID-19 related challenges, of course. There was not much data on the problem in Maine, as Frank said, and so following work of the Wisconsin Hope Lab and as we'll see in a minute, UMass Boston, they put together this survey. The UMass Food Insecurity Conference in 2016 was the model for how the survey was put together. They found that students who experienced severe food insecurity were likely to have academic problems like failing courses or withdrawing, and I'm going to talk about the results of that in our study. They also looked at homelessness, and I'm going to briefly touch on the intersection with homelessness. So the UMaine Cooperative Extension, Maine Campus Compact, and the Good Shepherd Food Bank collaborated to put together this statewide survey. And they hope to create a better understanding of the scope of hunger on Maine campuses, how that impacts student learning in particular. And hang on just a second. I have a technical issue on my end, and identify strategies that can be implemented to address the problem. So they did a literature review and followed the UMass survey and created this self-reported survey instrument, contacted the institutional research boards on each campus, and it ended up being 38 multiple choice and open-ended questions that were disseminated both via SurveyMonkey and through hard copies, many of which were administered during class time through allies derived from previous Maine Hunger Dialogue activities. This happened throughout the fall of 2016 and spring of 2017. The survey was distributed to 26 higher education institutions, 24 campuses responded. There were faculty and staff participants, which are not being discussed today, and the students were recruited through professors. There were 1,704 usable responses from students and 480 from faculty and staff. So the response rate was 74%. So that's the overview, and I'm Kim McKegg, and I'm going to be talking about the analysis of these results and giving you an overview of those. In addition to the institutions listed earlier, I am affiliated with Husson University, so adding those in. And again, I'm so grateful and excited that I've been able to be a part of this project. So just to give you some context of kind of where we are now, in terms of the world, people experiencing acute food insecurity, according to the World Food Program, in 2019, it was 135 million. And in 2020, it's projected to be a 96% increase to 265 million. So that's the COVID effect. In the United States, we're looking at an increase of about 2 million, from 35.2 million to 37 million. And that is from the USDA and the New York Times recent report. In Maine, according to the USDA statistics, 13.6% of our households are food insecure, which compares with a national average of 11.7. So we have a baseline that's a little bit higher than the national average. And according to Feeding America's Map the Meal Gap, the food insecurity levels in Maine could increase by as much as 40% this year because of the COVID effect. Good Shepherd Food Bank is on the front lines of trying to combat this. Overall, they expect this year to be serving 31.5 million, or facilitating 31.5 million meals, which will be about 72% of the unmet food needs in the state. And that's actually down a little bit from the percentage that they were able to serve previously, because the need is going up so acutely. From their youth and family initiatives, this year they're expecting to serve 19,300 families compared to last year's 7,000. So that's more than doubled. Their hunger relief partners, 80% of them report that needs are continuing to increase in their community, and 47% reported increases in the need for meals for children due to the loss of childcare or school, because we know that a lot of Fighting Hunger for Kids works through Meals in Schools programs. So for people who are not super familiar with food insecurity, let's have a couple of definitions. These generally come from the USDA. That's the sort of government standard for defining it. And they have a series of questions. I'll show you some examples in a minute. Moderate food insecurity is defined as answering yes to 3 or more of those questions. And severe is defined as answering yes to 6 or more of those questions. Those used to be called food insecurity without hunger and food insecurity with hunger. That would be the severe one. But now the terminology has been changed to moderate and severe. Housing insecurity in our study was defined as answering yes to 1 of 2 questions. Having been homeless at least once during the time you were in college, or being unsure about the ability to stay at your current place for the next 2 weeks. Moderate insecurity was defined as answering yes to 1 of those questions, and high insecurity was defined as answering yes to both. So just keep that in mind when I do the slide about housing insecurity. So these are some of the USDA questions. The food that I bought just didn't last, and I didn't have enough money to get more. I couldn't afford to eat balanced meals. In the last 12 months, since like October for now, did you or other adults in your household ever cut the size of your meals or skip meals because there wasn't enough money for food? How often did you skip meals? In the last 12 months, did you ever eat less than you felt you should because there wasn't enough money for food? In the last 12 months, were you ever hungry? That was typo, sorry, but didn't eat because there wasn't enough money for food. And the response scale for this was never happened, sometimes happened, often happened. Okay. And so with those definitions in mind, I'd like to ask our team to launch a poll where you can let us know if you've experienced any food insecurity. And while you do that, I'm going to tell you about the general model for the analysis of the results. So we're focusing on food insecurity and to some extent housing insecurity. We looked at whether a number of factors are correlated with experiencing that, including the type of educational institution that you attend, whether it's a public four-year, a vocational technical community college, or a private four-year. We looked at some environmental characteristics, such as whether you live in an urban or suburban area and which geographic location in Maine. And we looked at student characteristics, different demographics of students. We also looked at whether there were results of food insecurity, including having academic difficulties and the students who utilized various resources. And I don't have time to report on the resource utilization so much today, but I think Amy is going to actually address a lot of those ideas in her presentation later. So keep an eye out for that. Here are the general results. In our study, we found that of the 1704 respondents, 68.8%, or about 2/3, were food secure. We found that 27.4, so slightly over a quarter of them, were moderately food insecure, and almost 4% of them were severely food insecure. So notice that between the moderate and severe food insecure groups, that's about 30%, and compare that to what I said earlier with the Maine households that are food insecure, which is about 14%. So it's about double that. That's possibly also related to the fact that people who answered this might be particularly interested in food insecurity, but it's definitely a concern that it is so much higher than the overall. If we look at answers to some of the specific survey questions, the most frequent incidence was people saying they were unable to eat balanced meals. The next most likely one was worried about having enough money for food, and both of those are in the 40% range. Next, about 1/3 of them said that they skipped meals, and then less than 20% said they didn't have regular access to fresh produce, they did not eat to feed someone else in the household, and that they did not eat for 1 or 2 days. And that last one is one of the key indicators for severe food insecurity. So it is troubling though, that's over 10%. I'd like to pause now and ask if we have enough responses to take a look at our poll. And so we see, again, about 2/3 have not experienced food insecurity, and about 4% are currently food insecure. So I would say that's definitely toward the more severe range. And then we have about 30% who have experienced it in the past or in the past year. And so that does actually mirror the results that we got in our study pretty closely. Thank you so much for answering that. And please make sure that you get hooked up with the resources that are going to be available through this webinar if you've experienced, or certainly if you're currently experiencing food insecurity. So let's talk about some of the things that we find are related to food insecurity. First of all, we looked at institutional types, and what we found was that students at the vocational, technical, and community colleges have the highest food insecurity scores. And They are significantly higher than students at four-year publics, who are also significantly higher than students at private schools. So we're finding the most severe food insecurities in those vocational, technical, and community colleges. Those were tested with an analysis of variance for all of you statistics geeks out there, just so that you know, and did come out to be significant. There are a lot of demographics and environmental characteristics that are also related to greater food insecurity. So for example, the way to read this first line is students in rural areas experienced greater food insecurity than students in suburban and urban. And the students in suburban and urban areas, because those are in parentheses, those were not significantly different from one another. So, so the rural students were significantly higher, and that probably makes some sense because they may not have access to as many mitigation resources like food shelves and things like that in rural areas as you might in a larger urban area. We found that older students experienced more food insecurity than younger students. We found that non-white students experienced more food insecurity than white students. And based on the demographics of our student population in the state, we unfortunately had to lump all non-white demographic categories into one group in order to have a large enough group to be able to do that comparison. In the LGBTQIA spectrum, we found that students who identify as transgender in any modality experienced greater food insecurity than cisgender identified students, and also that students who identified as gay, bisexual, lesbian, queer experienced greater food insecurity than students who did not. In terms of relationship status, and I think this is partly correlated with potential for the next item, which is children, we found that divorced students experienced more food insecurity than single students. And students who were married or had a domestic partner also experienced more food insecurity than single students. And of course, divorced, married, domestic partnered students are more likely to be living off campus, and so also not as likely to have a meal plan. And so that makes some sense there. And certainly having children in the home is a concern, both in terms of children's meal security and also that one key question about not eating to feed somebody else in your home. That tends to be people who have children. And we found that students who have children in their household do experience more food insecurity than students who don't have children in their household. Looking at the intersection of food insecurity and housing insecurity, we see that there is a significant relationship between those. And sorry, just watching my time. That students who have high levels of housing insecurity tend to say that they are also at least moderately food insecure. So 84% of those high housing insecurity students say they are at least moderately food insecure. While students who are not experiencing any housing insecurity, only a quarter of them are at least moderately food insecure. So the more housing insecure you are, typically the more food insecure you are. They tend to move together. So let's look at the outcomes of food insecurity and the implications for what happens to students. And the first thing that I want to look at is academic performance. And what we see here in this graph is that for the students who have a low level of food insecurity, there is still a significant portion who have some kind of academic performance impact. So between 40 and 45% is the high end of that. And the difference gets smaller. I hope I'm reading this graph right. At the high end, it's pretty similar between the those sort of not experiencing and those experiencing. I'm not sure I'm reading this graph right. You can see the pattern is the same across different institutional types. I'm going to go to the table because it's actually easier for me to explain this in the table. So similar pattern though across all the different institutional types. So what this is basically saying is for all categories, 19% of students said that they were experiencing some performance impacts. 4.4% said they were experiencing moderate performance impacts, and only 2.1% said that they were experiencing very high performance impacts. Okay. But look at what happens within any institutional type when you look at the food insecurity levels. Okay, so if you're not experiencing any food insecurity, only 8.8% of them are experiencing a performance impact, which is actually lower than the overall average of 19.3. But students who are experiencing food insecurity, that goes up to 41% experiencing moderate, okay, or experiencing somewhat of a performance impact. For the moderate category, the benchmark is 4.4%. For people with no food insecurity, it's quite a bit lower than that, less than half. For those with food insecurity, it's more than double, okay? And for those experiencing a very high impact, again, the benchmark is 2.1%. With no food insecurity, it's a little bit lower than that. And for some food insecurity, it's higher than that. This somewhat category probably is showing the biggest gap between the yes and no, because it's so much larger to begin with. These are really much lower ranges on the moderately and very much. That is some good news. Our students are not experiencing the more severe performance impacts, but the gap is very worrisome between the yes and no on the food insecurity. You can see again for the vocational technical community college students, you know, the same big gap at the beginning, similar gap in moderately, and really quite a significant gap in the very much, and a similar pattern for the private schools. So food insecurity makes a difference on experiencing academic performance issues. Not eating for 1 or 2 days, which is an indicator of severe food insecurity, also has a big impact. For the public schools, we are looking at the percent of students who felt that they have to withdraw from school. And you can see that the biggest category there is for students who often do not eat for 1 or 2 days, almost 30% of them withdrew from school. Interestingly, the pattern's a little bit different for vocational technical and private schools. Here, the largest category of withdrawal is actually for students experiencing not eating only sometimes. So here, for students who sometimes could not eat for 1 or 2 days, 35.7% withdrew from school. So, and similarly for private schools. So one of the things that tells us from a policy perspective is that in some types of institutions, you might actually want to monitor and try to intervene earlier in the cycle, sort of as soon as students are sometimes having an incidence of not eating, which is a more severe sort of issue, that they may need resources because it's going to more quickly lead to adverse effects like them having to withdraw from the institution. And of course, you can see that the category of often for vocational, technical, and community colleges is also resulting in a pretty high percentage who withdrew from school. So at all levels, that's a concern in those institutions. Another way to think about this is to look at the relationship between food insecurity and dropping out. It is a significant relationship, both with moderate food insecurity overall and for those who had not eaten for 1 or 2 days. Both of those are significant. And you can think of this as a ratio of dropout rates. So for public four-year institutions, students who were food insecure had a dropout rate that was 4.2 times higher than students who did not have food insecurity. For private schools, it's 5.4 times higher. And for vocational technical community colleges, it's 6.1 times higher. So this puts you at significantly higher risk of dropout when you have food insecurity. So to sum up, 31.2% of respondents had moderate to severe food insecurity, and its impacts tend to be more severe for vocational and technical community college students, and least severe but not non-existent for private school students. It's related to student demographics, it's related to housing insecurity, and we can see that students with even moderate levels of food insecurity are more likely to experience school performance problems and dropping out. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing, and I think we have some time for Q&A.
Thanks. We have one question's come in so far. So if you have more questions, definitely type them in that Q&A box. Someone asked, is there a way for them to access this study? And do you have information on specific schools in Maine?
I'll take a first stab at answering that. So we're currently preparing a manuscript on this to be submitted to a peer-reviewed journal to try to get the specifics of the information out more broadly that way. There's also an executive summary of it that has been presented to Cooperative Extension. And so there are pieces of it floating around, but we're not releasing the whole thing because we are in preparation on a manuscript. So this video will be available later for people to look at this information that we shared, but there isn't necessarily more. We have information by responding institution, and Samaya earlier this year prepared an analysis for the University of Southern Maine on this. So with our institutional partners, we do sometimes take out pieces of it and try to do an executive summary for them for their institution. So I don't want to blanket promise to go do that for everybody, but just so that you know that that is something that has happened with institutions, and Amy may actually have access to that. I'm not sure if she got that. But that's one way we have information. Does anybody else on the team want to chime in on any of that?
No, I think you said it well, Kim. I think that we had an awful lot of data from 38 questions generated, and but hopefully at some point we will be able to publish the results where you can look at that specifically, or we can get you the data for different schools.
Okay, we got a bunch more questions coming in now. Have there been any positive effects of this study being conducted in regards to it creating more resources for students experiencing food insecurity? So has anything already been created as a result of this study?
And I see Amy nodding, so I was going to actually defer to her because I know she's, again, going to talk about some of these things later. So do you want to chime in on that, Amy?
Sure, thanks. I guess one major thing is just the trying to raise awareness, and especially within the state of Maine and for the state of Maine. There was a bill passed, LD 1159, and the staff at the State Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry have the information and are looking at this and the fact that college students do seem to be disproportionately impacted. So within Maine, that awareness level is rising around these issues. So, also, there will be the grant program as a result of this, and I'll talk about some of the ways that those grants have been deployed in the past as well. So there is action happening on the ground, mostly led by a lot of students.
Yeah, and I would just add that because we've been doing the Maine Hunger Dialogue since 2014, although we didn't do it last year because we hosted the Universities Fighting World Hunger Summit in Portland, but we have offered those grants. We funded 51 of those grants and been able to reach hundreds of students and staff since 2014. So certainly the issue is much higher on the radar than it was, but it's still very hidden. But a lot of those resources are still not adequate and are still underutilized. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this today. And Amy's going to address that in her next part.
So I love this next question. Why do rural areas experience more food insecurity than urban areas when rural areas are where most of the agricultural activities are based?
And I would like to take a stab at this, but also then ask others on the team to chime in, because I think we all have a lot of perspectives on this, and it's a really complicated, complex question. So a couple of things. Food insecurity is not just about growing food, it's about the sort of systemic, structural ways in which food gets to people. And certainly it's not just college campuses, but this study focused on college students and college campuses. So we have to kind of think about how food gets to college students. And they're not necessarily the ones involved in the agriculture. Also, even if you do want to get involved in agriculture and grow your own foods and preserve them, that takes a fair number of resources and access to what economists would call inputs. And, certainly later in this webinar, we're going to have some things related to that. But again, college students don't necessarily always have access to those inputs. So those are a couple of dynamics that specifically impact college students, even if they're sort of surrounded by fields of plenty in their geographic area. And other folks who want to comment on this?
Yeah, sure. I would add that the data related to college students actually does track in parallel with the general population, and Maine does have significant pockets of rural poverty, which is directly tied to hunger. So that's one of the major challenges for our state over time.
The next two questions both speak to if you plan to continue doing this study. One person is wondering if you do it annually to be able to track trends over time or gather a panel data set. And someone else points out that since it's been 4 years, the student population on campus is totally different. So it'd be a population chance to survey a whole new group.
I can speak to that, and I can just say that for Sally and I in the Vistas, it was a Herculean effort to get these 1,700 responses. We weren't able to do it in one semester. We kept going because we wanted a high enough number to make it significant. And the reason for that is, we're just a bunch of faculty and staff that approached colleges, and some colleges were willing to let us into their classrooms and some weren't. I think, I think one of our goals is to bring this research to the attention of upper level administrators, college presidents, and the chancellor, and so forth. And if we can get their cooperation, then I think we can reach a lot more and do a much more impactful randomized study. So it was really a challenging study to do, and that's why it took a while to do it. And then it took a while for us to crunch the data.
And I will add to that we have already been in discussion about trying to redo the study. I'm not sure that it would be feasible to do it annually because of it being such a Herculean task. But we know that it's been a few years. I would push back a little bit on the idea that the student population is 100% different. Certainly, we've cycled through a generation of college students who graduated since they were in the study, but if you look at the demographics of students in higher education over the last 5, 10, 15 years, they're certainly not 100% different. They're very similar, and the trends are there in terms of students with fewer resources coming to college, more first generation students coming to college, more diverse student bodies coming to college. They're going to be similar to those students 5 years ago. So, what has changed is there's a greater awareness of food insecurity on college campuses, and there are some more resources. And so it would be interesting to see if the incidence of food insecurity has gone down, or if the resource use pattern has changed, in that time. So we know it's a Herculean task, but we really are talking about trying to do it again, hopefully within the next year, really nicely within the next 6 months.
Mentioning resources is a great segue to our next question. Is there a reluctance on the part of students affected by food insecurity to admit it, and therefore not take advantage of food banks, et cetera? And are there any efforts made to protect their privacy when they're accessing food?
And I'm going to ask Amy to comment on this in a minute too, but I think in surveys like this, there's less reluctance because they know that they are going to be anonymous. And that's why our numbers may seem relatively higher than what you see in terms of the proportion of students who actually do access services. So in surveys, I think they're not as reluctant. In terms of actually going to resources, there is definitely a concern about being perceived as food insecure, needing resources, et cetera. And so resources on campuses do try very hard to make them welcoming environments, to protect students' privacy and things like that. And this may steal some of Amy's thunder later, so I don't want to do that, but I'll just ask if she wants to comment on that a little bit.
Sure. I would add that the only thing that especially on-campus services tend to collect is data that is unidentifiable, but they do often ask to see a student ID and then record the visit to a food pantry in the system so that they can tell if the returning student is a new student or a repeat visitor. But none of that data is shared in any way outside of the pantry system, and it's just tied to your student ID number, so it doesn't have any names or other identifying information, and it's never shared. So they do try to keep services anonymous and provide food in ways that can be discreet, and I'll talk about the ways that different programs are delivered in that way.
So our next question, they're interested to hear more about that correlation between housing and food insecurity, and if there are any significant variations in that correlation across demographic groups or rural-urban lines.
And I do have some analysis that is not presented today in this presentation because I didn't have time. So some of that will go into the manuscript for the article. We didn't see a lot of significant variations in that food insecurity and housing insecurity tend to go together issue. And we found similarly that like housing insecurity in rural areas where there were fewer resources for food insecurity also meant that there were typically fewer resources for housing insecurity. So a lot of the same patterns obtained. but it gets into fairly complicated kinds of graphs and tables to explain all of the specifics of that. So I didn't bring them today because I thought we'll just drown people if we try.
And I was interested in that. The numbers you reported on people's it sounded like self-reporting if their academic performance was poorer as a result. And how accurate do you think self-reporting on that is? And do you think there's a chance that they're underreporting because they're not even aware of the degree to which hunger would affect that?
It's certainly possible, but it wasn't a self-report of necessarily like, because I'm experiencing food insecurity, I'm having performance impact. It was more are you experiencing like poor performance in your classes? Did you have to drop out of school, or did you drop out of school in the last whatever period of time? Yes or no, kind of thing. And then correlating those with the food insecurity rather than asking students to hypothesize about whether it was the food insecurity that was leading to problems.
Great, so I don't see any more questions. Frank, are you okay if we get started on the next section a few minutes early?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So while Amy starts sharing her slides, I'll introduce her. Amy Carrington is the USM Food Studies Program Specialist, and she coordinates with partners in Maine's food systems to develop collaborative projects and research agendas. She supports students' academics to career pathways and skill development by referring them to internships and are involving them in planning and delivering trainings, workshops, and conferences. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks. Yeah, so one of the first things I would say is, like all good academics, a lot of what I'm about to present is other people's work, and especially the work of students on different campuses that have done work to address campus hunger. I work as the internship coordinator and program specialist for the University of Southern Maine's Food Studies program. And I want to talk a little bit about what we've done on that specific campus. And I know a lot of work goes on throughout the entire system and on other campuses, but I am going to focus a little bit on our campus there in Portland, Maine. But first I want to say that some of the data on a national level, there have been multiple studies, and in those studies, approximately half of all students experience food insecurity at some point during their academic career. And the scope of the problem that has been identified by those national studies is alarming, and it is cause for a systematic response on all campuses. And even the US government has reported that food and housing insecurity among college students does undermine their experiences, their success, and their attainment of credentials. Next slide, please. So some of the different contributing factors were discussed earlier, and I'm going to highlight some of those for Maine. So one thing is that students who are experiencing food insecurity significantly tend to work. 68% of those students are actually employed. And the majority of students who experience basic needs insecurity work more hours than students who do not experience insecurities. And I also want to highlight the disparities that were mentioned between genders, as well as the growing enrollment from low-income families, from first-generation students. And also in Maine, we have a very significant non-traditional student population, which is specifically defined by age. So we do have older students in Maine returning to school. So those are some various different factors, as well as increased educational costs and inadequate aid packages. And institutions don't always tend to recognize, admit to, or adequately respond to this issue. So we're going to quickly do another poll, and I'll give everybody a minute to fill that out. And I think you can check all that apply. And I want to remind people it's also anonymous. And I'm not sure if we're close to being done with the poll or not, but when we do have enough respondents, we can go ahead and share. So I'm not sure if other folks can see the results or not on their screens. Is the poll closed? Beck?
Yep, it's closed and everybody should be able to see the results now.
Great, perfect. So those are some of the results. Interesting, for volunteered at a food pantry soup kitchen, we have a high number, 75%. I think that speaks to the Northeast and a lot of the work that we do to support each other, especially in these winter months. So you can go ahead and move on to the next slide. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about hunger stigma, and that's already been mentioned, and people have asked questions in regards to that. And one of the things about the last poll that I wanted to mention is that as people begin to identify in some of those different categories, it can raise different emotional responses. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there is a lot of stigma in society. And we don't always think of this as a systemic issue. Sometimes we do look at individual people and wonder, what's wrong with them that they're experiencing this, as if it isn't something that is common and widespread and a direct effect of how we choose to distribute food in ways that are inequitable. And I want to highlight a quote from a report on college hunger specifically. It was noted that food insecurity is often intensified or by perceived or real stigma and shame associated with poverty or low income status, further exacerbating the impact of related challenges for students. And that was noted by a number of different students in that campus survey, that the stigma associated with hunger is something that is harmful to them. We really do need to shift the conversation to think of this and address this as a community issue and not a problem for individual students to solve for themselves. Some campuses do have food security coalitions, and those coalitions spread awareness about the issue and also support programs on the ground that help to address the issue. Next slide, please. So next, I'm going to highlight some of the different recommendations. And the key theme is to use a holistic approach to change the food environment on campuses. One recommendation is that universities appoint a director of student wellness and basic needs. And then the other recommendations that I'll go into in more detail are investments and specifically providing funding and money in 5 different program areas. These program areas were gleaned from the Food Fuels Learning Report, which was a study done on food insecurity in the Portland, Maine public school system. But those different themes do parallel a lot of the responses that are seen on campuses. And those areas are charitable foods, federal nutrition programs, campus gardens, nutrition education, and sustainable practices. So as I go through the next set of slides, I just want to remind students that You should consider applying for one of the $500 grants. And these are some of the different project areas and categories in which you might like to propose a project. And also I'd like to highlight food preservation, which will be talked about later by another one of my colleagues as another area where you might be interested in applying for funding and doing some work. Next slide, please. So the first type of charitable food program I'm going to talk about is utilizing digital platforms and partnering with nonprofits to share food. Swipe Out Hunger is a program that is specific to college campuses. It's a national organization, and then there are individual chapters. But the idea is that students can donate meals to other students who are food insecure using this digital platform. And students can apply for the meal swipes, and they're preloaded onto a student's card, just like as if they had paid cash for a meal plan. And then they're attached to the student's profile and cards, and they can use them. And nobody will know where the money or the funding or the meal had come from. So far in Maine, we don't have a Swipe Out Hunger program, but Sodexo, who is the food service provider on several of our campuses, actually does provide meals to students through their card system and make donations in that same way. So we also did have a student intern working for Sodexo, and her recommendation was that Maine consider a system-wide meal share program. And part of the reason why is because the national organizations do have associated fees, and there might be potential legal issues associated with that affiliation. And also because the Maine system is trying to create a shared meal plan system for students who are paying. And so it's just another way that we can collaborate across the UMaine system to help students. Next slide, please. So another form of charitable foods that is becoming very widespread, not only in Maine, but across the country, are campus food pantries. The University of Southern Maine Campus Food Pantry serves all 3 of our different campuses in Portland, Gorham, and Lewiston, Maine. And they shared some of their fall impact data with me. Last fall, between September and November, they had 325 individual student visits. 100 of those were repeat visits, and students came an average of 5 times each. Oh, sorry, average of 5 items when they came to pick up food. And so this is some of the ways that Pantry might be collecting data. So you can see we're not really identifying individual students, but we're counting the number of students coming and how often they come. There were over 850 pounds of food that was distributed. And one new feature in 2019 was a cool zone, and that included fresh fruits and vegetables. And that new cooler was provided through funds from one of the grants from the university's Fighting World Hunger event that we had, that was last year. And so that has allowed us to accept green vegetables in partnership with the Cumberland County Food Security Council, and also to have dairy items as well. I also wanted to mention that it's not just food that they distribute, but they have different personal items as well. So at USM, the food pantry is operated by the Student Affairs Office, and they staff it with the graduate assistants, and they also use the Federal Work Study Program to hire different student employees. And there's a link there to the website if you want to find more information and details, especially about their hours of operation. A few additional highlights is that it is a self-assessed needs-based program. So you don't have to prove that you're low income or that you need the food. You just have to show up and say so. It's open to all students and community members that have a USM ID. So it's not just students, but staff and others within the system who have a USM ID could also use the pantries. There are a lot of non-perishable items, as well as I mentioned the cool zone items. In Portland, the pantry is in the Woodbury Campus Center, and students can get food there 2 different ways. There's a shopping model where they can choose from the shelves, and they can also pre-order and pickup. And that is new in 2020 due to COVID, trying to create a pre-order system for students that where it's easier and more convenient and feels a little bit more safe to pick up what you've pre-ordered. And then the pre-order system was also expanded and creating increased access on our Gorham campus this fall. So the pre-order system has really expanded a lot this year. And then students pick up weekly and can pick up weekly either on the Portland or Gorham campus. Next slide, please. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about federal nutrition programs, and in general for college students, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, commonly referred to as SNAP, which was formerly the food stamp program, is one of the federal programs that applies most for college students. In 2019, the USM Food Studies program worked with social work students and with partners at Preble Street Resource Center to do SNAP education and outreach on USM's campuses. This is a picture of one of the students and some of the bags that were distributed, as well as a picture of the student intern in Augusta. And she did a lot of advocacy in Augusta around these issues and trying to raise awareness with the state legislature. And in particular, Maine is on track to try to make the SNAP program more accessible for college students. There was a work requirement for students that we can ask for a waiver for. And so we're really advocating right now for, in Maine, is trying to figure out ways to make the program more accessible, especially right now in this time of need. And so the students who worked, one was an intern and one was a federal work study student. They actually did a lot of work, one-to-one work with students who are trying to navigate the application process and helped them understand how to apply and receive benefits. A few other federal nutrition benefit programs that might apply include the Women and Infant Children program. For any students who have children in public schools, there are free and reduced price schools meals. And also for older students, there's a senior farm share program in Maine where seniors can shop from local farms. So there are multiple different federal nutrition programs that students could apply to across different offices in the state to try to receive additional food benefits through those programs. Next slide, please. So campus community gardens, USM Campus Garden was started by a group of students, and there were plots that individual community members could apply to and have and grow their own food. We also had some plots that were operated by volunteers growing food for the USM Food Pantry. And in this photo, Blaze Goodman, who is a USM graduate who was also a food studies minor, he was also staffed the Husky Veterans Office, and there was a plot that he helped manage and bring students who are veterans into the community garden. And those veterans were actually really useful and helpful. He was like a #1 volunteer for helping to repair the wooden beds, which tend to break down every 3 to 5 years or so. We also had some Harvest for Hunger data because we were growing food for the food pantry to share and using that model and promoting that model here at our campus garden. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about sustainable practices, and one of the key practices is food recovery and taking otherwise unused food and redirecting it. One of the best ways to redirect that food, if it's still edible, is to people. And Sodexo recovered that food and did that in 2 different ways. For the meals that were already prepared, they had a cooler on campus that they called the Campus Food Security Cooler. And it was placed near the cash registers at checkout. And at the end of the day, they would put that food in the cooler, and anybody that knew about it could go and take it. And again, it was a self-identified need, and it wasn't staffed. There was nobody there. People could just go, students could just go and take the food at the end of the day. Another project that Sodexo got involved in was called Campus Kitchens Project. And they helped to cook and prepare food weekly that was delivered to our partners at the Boys and Girls Club in Portland. And students volunteered, went to the Gorham campus weekly the day before to prep the meal. And they were using food that was about to expire, but hadn't yet expired. And so they could cook in bulk and deliver to that community partner. And then another recommendation that has been made is to use technology, especially to give blasts when there are catering events on campuses, and there's often food left over at the end of catering events. So to use that technology to send blasts and information and redirect that food. And the quickest, easiest way is for students to actually go in and pick it up and leave that room with it, so that the Sodexo team doesn't even have to clean up or pack up and put it in that food security cooler. So the blasts, I know different departments in different buildings have set up those blasts sort of behind the scenes, but a well-coordinated centralized system to do that more effectively would help to significantly reduce food waste, and not only that, but get it into the hands of individuals who need it. Next slide, please. So this slide is a little video, and this is a Vista volunteer, Carolyn Brady. We're going to hear from her.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Brady, and I am
I am just gonna unshare and reshare because I realize it didn't optimize for sound. So give me 1 second.
Campus Compact's COVID Recovery AmeriCorps member. I am here to share with you today a few best practices that I have learned surrounding hunger with respect to COVID-19. In the time of COVID, we have identified 2 separate groups of students that we need to be focusing on. The first is our traditional understanding of a hungry student, those that might not have the financial resources to procure food of their own. The second is one that we often forget about in the time of COVID, and that is a student who has the ability to procure food but does not have access to it. For example, a student that has purchased a meal plan but has to quarantine in their room for 14 days so they can't actually go to the dining halls. Many schools across the country have taken additional measures in order to support our traditional understanding of a hungry student, leaving out snack tables throughout the day across campus, allowing students to take additional food from the dining hall during meal times. These are additional resources that you can provide to the traditional student who might not be able to financially secure food of their own. When it comes to students who have the ability to procure food but don't have access to it, we have a lot of schools that have been investing in what I like to call food resource officers. Sometimes those can be members of your Res Life staff, sometimes they are students specifically tasked with delivering food to students. At the end of the day, it's really just making sure that schools don't leave that to chance, and they have someone designated with ensuring that their students who might not be able to go to the dining hall can still gain access to the food that they have purchased. It is my hope that one or both of these suggestions will be able to help a hungry student on a campus near you.
Thanks, Pamela. And thank you so much for sharing that video, Carolyn. And I also wanted to mention that in our conversation, one of the other considerations that we discussed were students that might need vegetarian or halal meals, and the need to make sure that students are not only getting food, but also getting the right types of food and the food that's culturally appropriate that they're looking for. So the last thing I want to throw out there are different staffing options for all these different practices and programs. And I want to highlight the Federal Work Study Program, graduate assistants are very common, especially to staff food pantries, as well as VISTA volunteers. And Campus Compact and the State Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry are two organizations within the state that are run VISTA programs. And the state is actually opening up a new one that is focused on resolving hunger in Maine. And so hopefully some of our campuses can leverage those resources as well. And then my last slide is just a quick note of all the different resources and information that I drew from, and that is all. And I think we have about 4 minutes for questions if anybody has any.
We do. Thanks, Amy. While people start to enter their questions, I'm curious, you mentioned that there are programs where students can share their meals with other students, and sounds like some of Sodexo and some of those companies. Are there any programs where the aid comes from the university itself?
You know, there could be, at USM, we do have a student emergency loan fund. And so for USM, there are multiple ways that account has funding. And one of them is from the university itself. And so they actually work more directly one-to-one with students to actually give them sort of a cash as opposed to meal plans. But that meal plan program is one where there could be multiple sources of income as well to fund those meal swipes and deliver food in a way that sort of makes students still feel as if they are part of the normal food environment on campus and getting food the same way that other students do.
Yeah, I was thinking with funding, could there be any sort of like sliding scale for meal plans or something that's need-based?
Yeah, and meal programs are operated slightly different from campus to campus. So some have a food service provider and others are self-operated, like UMaine Orono, for example, and a lot of the private colleges do self-operate their dining programs. But there is room for all of those different universities to develop systems to donate meal plans and have sliding scales and do all those different things that make food more accessible. And I'm happy to say that they all do seem very willing to partner, and especially when students come to them with interesting ideas. And they've also hosted a lot of students who are working on these issues.
Could you talk about where the food comes from that stocks these food pantries?
Sure. Yeah, so one of the best practices is actually for campus pantries to coordinate with the food bank because that is actually the cheapest source of food. And pantries are able to procure that food in the same way and at the same prices that grocery stores are. However, it is common for a lot of smaller pantries to actually go to their local stores and shop directly. It can be a little bit more expensive, but depending upon the situation, it might just be significantly more convenient and fill that need. And I know, for example, on our Portland campus, food was moving so quickly that we were restocking weekly and couldn't always get to the food bank weekly. So we would go to our local Hannaford as needed. Also, through gleaning programs, we partner with the Cumberland County Food Security Council to glean fresh fruits and vegetables. And Frank also mentioned the Harvest for Hunger program and people donating through that program. So home and community gardeners making donations. And finally, I would say that USM's food pantry actually has a number of corporate sponsors and donors affiliated with that. And all of them are also listed on our website as well.
And if anybody's interested in that video that we played, is that available anywhere online for them?
So no, it's not yet. Actually, I just, Carolyn had sent it to me last night, but I can connect with her and Frank and others and put it up as a resource on the site though. And we're still continuing to gather and collect those resources. So thanks for the reminder to tag that as a resource would post up there.
I'd just like to add to the technological aspect of it. If any students or staff out there want to get like a meal swipe or a program like that started, one of the people that I met at University Spotting World Hunger that I still correspond with is student, graduate student at New York University, and his name is Jonathan Chin, and he has created an app called Share Our Meals. There's a link to it on our resource page. And he is always welcoming groups to reach out to him with their specific issue and problem and do like a technology hackathon to solve that problem and help you create whatever kind of system you might be needed. So it could be something like the mail swipe or the Share Our Meals thing that already exists, or you might create something that works for you specifically. So you could reach out to me if you're interested, and I will put you in touch with Jonathan.
So I just really quickly, if we can squeeze in the one last question, in what ways could food insecurity affect students on campuses where first-year students are required to have a full year meal plan?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say is that in some of the research that I've seen is that actually first year students living on campus are actually experiencing food insecurity. And I think I was slightly surprised by that data and the fact that that was true, in part because students actually often do have a full meal plan, but there are those students tend to experience food insecurity in specific ways. So for example, some students have late classes that end after the dining hall has closed. Some students are commuting between different campuses, in Portland and Gorham in particular. As well, some students are on campus for sports practices, and we've seen that sometimes athletes that are returning to campus before dining services are open in full are sometimes confused about where to find the food or just have limited access to food and transportation off campus at that time. So there are some critical moments in which students living on campus might be experiencing food insecurity that we can pay attention to.
And I just wanted to chime in on that. I think another dynamic to be aware of is what Amy referred to earlier, that, you know, it's not just providing food, but appropriate food, whether that's culturally appropriate food or dietarily appropriate food. You know, students may have different kinds of allergies or health issues that preclude them from accessing a large variety of the foods that are available even in well-stocked dining halls. And so, you know, it's great that administrations have become more and more attuned to the vast variety of students' needs around food, even when they have meal plans.
Great, thank you, Amy. And next we're going to welcome, a little change of pace. Kathy Savoy is our extension educator with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, and she's been providing food safety, home food preservation, and nutrition education for over 24 years. And she leads our Master Food Preserver Volunteer Program, which is actually the only one of its kind in New England. She's going to be speaking to us from the Cumberland Kitchen. So welcome, Kathy.
Thank you. And I'm glad to be a part of today's Maine Hunger Dialogue. And I'm really happy that food preservation as a topic is something that we are featuring today. As was mentioned, I am in the University of Maine Cooperative Extension office in Cumberland County, which is located in Falmouth. And I'm in our demonstration kitchen today. And I just want to talk a bit about what is food preservation. And also the main intent of today's presentation is to direct you to the vast library of resources that are available through the University of Maine Cooperative Extension on food preservation. So what is food preservation? Let's put it into some context. And in a nutshell, we can refer to it as something that allows us to save foods that are fresh today. And that can be done through a variety of methods, including pressure canning, boiling water bath processing, drying in a dehydrator, freezing, or root cellaring. And these methods prevent the growth of microorganisms that would cause food to otherwise go rancid. So we have created, through these different methods of food preservation, safe foods to consume at a later time. So I'd like to ask all of you a question at this time, and we've got a poll that we're going to launch. And the question is, I'm asking if you have ever done any food preservation yourself. So do you have it? Oh, it's asking about your level of experience. So if you could respond by selecting one of those levels, that would be great. And I'd like to give you about 10 more seconds to respond to this poll. And then I'd like to ask our moderator to go ahead and share those results. So what we can see is that the majority of folks have no experience in the realm of food preservation as I described it. So it's good to know that you are an audience that is ripe for the information on where to go should food preservation be something that you're interested in the future. So thanks for taking part in that poll. And what I'd like to talk a little bit about is that, you know, beyond the scope of the science of canning, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we can also look to food preservation as a means to reduce food waste, as a means to save money. And one of my favorites is as a means to increase an individual's self-sufficiency in meeting their own food needs. And what I have found in the 24 years that I've been involved in teaching food preservation is that it is something that is a very empowering skill for people to learn. And what we have been witness to in the COVID-19 is that we have seen not only a rebound in the interest of home food preservation as a hobby, as a result of a lot of people gardening earlier on in the season, but we have also seen that people have expressed a heightened increase in food preservation as they have come to have concerns around food access as it relates to their concerns around food distribution systems within our country. So a lot of people really are seeing home food preservation as a means of self-reliance and security around meeting their own food needs. So what I wanted to spend some time today doing in the period of time that I have with you is to talk to you about that wealth of resources that come to you from Cooperative Extension on food preservation. For over 100 years, we have been the go-to resource for imparting the knowledge of the USDA recommendations around food preservation to the public. And here in Maine, we are fortunate to have a very robust program in terms of our in-person food preservation workshops, and also in terms of our close to over 100 people who have gone through the Master Food Preserver Volunteer Program and now serve as volunteers in the community. Of course, like everything else, this was a disrupted system for us this year. And because of the curveball that was thrown to us as a result of COVID, we were able to switch gears very quickly and transfer our in-person workshops into live webinars. And it was really a great process because we were able to provide these webinars over 23 weeks, and they coincided with the Maine growing season. And each week we featured foods that were in season at the time. And in addition to being a live webinar, we were also able to build in some of those other components that are hallmarks of cooperative extension programming via live demonstrations, pre-recorded videos, and of course, links to all of our resources that we have. So the topics ran the gamut of how to preserve fiddleheads and rhubarb, to canning meat as we enter into the hunting season. And we're going to close out our webinar series with cranberries this coming Tuesday. So what has been a wonderful outcome of this shift in educational delivery is that we now have really intensified our resource library, and we are sharing that with all of you today via the resources that you will receive as a participant in the Maine Hunger Dialogue, because all of these webinars, 23, have been recorded. And in addition to the video, the resources that were shared during the webinars will be available to you as well. So look for this information in your follow-up resources to the Maine Hunger Dialogue. So again, it is a wonderful resource that is available to you as you look to take your experience level from novice anywhere to veteran up a level, and look to see how you can use food preservation to really save more foods that are fresh today to be able to use them in future days. Those long, cold winter days are coming up quick. So I would like to, at this time, and I believe I have about 3 minutes left, see if there are any questions from the audience as they relate to food preservation.
And while I give people a second to type in those questions, I'll ask you, I know that some groups at Glean have started preserving their own applesauce and things for food pantries. Can you see a role for food preservation on campus to address food insecurity?
So the area that I provide education in is the realm of home food preservation education. And we certainly do cross a line when we look to ramp that up to what would fall more within the scope of an industry practice, to be producing foods at a, preserving foods at a higher volume. And so regardless of whether or not foods are sold, there is a requirement that they do comply with all of the rules and regulations that a business would need to comply with to be able to process and share those foods. So the recommendation that I've given to a number of people who have asked about that is that I encourage people to dial back and look at how we can get those foods out to people fresh, because that is where we see the lowest level of risk versus launching into a processing endeavor.
Great. Could you tell us about the 2 different kinds of pots that you have in front of you?
Sure. So when we talk about food preservation methods, it all comes down to if you're looking to put something in a jar, so to can it, the pH level of the food that you are processing. So I've got some relish here in front of me, as well as a jar of applesauce. And these 2 foods are both acidic enough to be able to be processed in the boiling water bath. So a boiling water bath is simply a large pot that has enough water to go 1 to 2 inches over the tops of the jars, and also has a rack in the bottom of the pot. So again, this is the method, boiling water bath, that is safe for processing foods that are acidic. The other pot that I have over here is a type of a pressure canner. And a pressure canner is builds up steam, so it reaches a much higher temperature inside the chamber. And this is the only way that you can safely preserve foods that fall into that low acid category. So that would be things like vegetables and meats. And so the pressure canner is what you need to use for that.
Thanks so much, Kathy. It looks like we don't have any more questions coming. Oh, we do. What would be the best way to preserve foods that would be affordable or accessible to low-income individuals and families?
So what is the best method? I would say that depends on what you have access to. And I'm going to step aside and point out to a freezer, which is really a very easy way to preserve foods. And if you are looking to reduce food waste, it's a great thing to become aware of what foods are in your refrigerator that are about to expire, and prior to expiring, get them in the freezer And all you need to be able to do that is, a freezer grade container. And then that is a very simple way to extend the life of foods so that you reduce your food waste.
What are the best practices for labeling preserved foods like those jars you have in front of you?
So my personal preference is super simple. It involves using a Sharpie to write directly on the lid with the contents of the jar as well as the date that it was processed. And if you look carefully at this jar, you can see that it is prepared for storage because I have removed the screw band from it. And that is how we store foods, because this is a vacuum seal. So you no longer need to have the screw band on because it is prone to allowing moisture to form in it and rusting. So you do remove the screw band and you do store it after you've labeled it. And again, I like the Sharpie on the lid because this does get thrown away. It is a single use, the dome lid, versus putting one of those fancy labels on the jar and then needing to scrub it off and get all the gluey mass off of it. So again, Cooperative Extension is available to you as a resource as you explore home food preservation, and we have plenty of ways for you to access our information. And I believe my time is up, so I don't want to get us off schedule too far.
Yep, thank you so much for joining us today, Kathy. Our next speaker is going to be Shirley Rush. Shirley is a professor of social work and BSW program director at the University of Maine Presque Isle, where she advises student and youth groups, as well as advising student and youth groups in Tanzania. Okay, Shirley, I'll turn it over to you. Got to unmute yourself.
There we
Right
go.
now.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Very good.
And give me 1 second. I'm actually going to reshare for the audio piece. Sorry about that, Shirley. You're good to go.
Okay. 7.8 billion people inhabit the earth. Of those, 700 million were exposed to severe food insecurity in 2018. 49.5 million children under the age of 5 are wasted worldwide. Community, a group of people who interact with one another. They often share common beliefs and historically were bound geographically in a particular neighborhood, region, or town. Today, as evidenced by our remote connection, we are interacting with people throughout the state of Maine, across the international boundary to the north with our Canadian neighbors, and around the world on the African continent with our friends in Tanzania, making us a global community. Tuko pamoja, we are together. We find ourselves unwitting actors making history amidst global threats, climate change and climate extremes, coronavirus, COVID-19, racial and economic disparities. Challenging circumstances do not diminish the need for nourishment. Likewise, as stress mounts, the need for social cohesion and community functioning increases. We are in crisis. People are overwhelmed, and the needs for adequate nutrition far exceed the available resources. We are attending the Maine Hunger Dialogue today, though participating remotely because of our shared beliefs about community and the persistent problem of hunger locally and globally, exacerbated now by the economic shock caused by the global pandemic. Thank you to the Maine Hunger Dialogue sponsors, panelists, and steering committee. Welcome to our webinar guests, and thank you, asanteni, to everyone near and far who contributed to this photo collage. North American students in the Student Organization of Social Workers at UMPI, and in Tanzania, to everyone in the Boom Boom Youth Group. I wish I could see your faces now. A special shout out to my technical assistants, Jessica Cameron, who doubles as an admissions counselor at UMPI, and Hillary Morton, BSW graduating senior and chair of SOSW. The USA is comprised of 50 states and 14 territories, and they identify 5 food groups. Next slide. Thank you. Fruits, vegetables, grains, protein, and dairy. Next slide. Americans eat less vegetables, fruit, whole grain, and dairy products than recommended. The diet consumed by Americans is generally too high in sodium, saturated fat, refined grains, and added sugars. 2/3 of adults and 1/3 of children and youth are overweight or obese in the United States. 36.6% of adults consume fast food in the US. Canada is comprised of 10 provinces and 3 territories in North America. And Canada identifies 4 food groups as follows: vegetables and fruits, milk products, meat and alternatives, and grain products. Vegetable intake is low in adults and children. 1 in 3 children are low in milk product intake, and 80% of seniors are also low in their milk product intake. The adult diet is linked to household income. 25% of Canadians eat prepared fast foods. These meals are typically high in fat and include pizza, burgers, sub sandwiches, hot dogs, cake, cookies, and donuts. Both men and women in the 30 to 40 age category consume more than 35% of their daily calories from fat. Dietary patterns vary regionally. Many rural communities are eating better for less by hunting and growing and preserving their own food. Tanzania is located near the equator in East Africa. It is comprised of the mainland and Zanzibar, bordered by the Indian Ocean. Dietary patterns are changing with economic development. Differences exist regionally and culturally, as well as in urban and rural areas. The diet generally lacks in diversity and consists mostly of carbohydrates. Milk and meat consumption is low. There are 4 food groups in Tanzania: milk and meat, pulses, legumes, nuts, cooking oil, fish, seafood, roots and tubers, cereals, vegetables, and fruits. A staple food is ugali, a stiff porridge made of maize flour. In 2019, 2,700,000 children under the age of 5 experienced stunting in Tanzania. Of unpregnant females between the ages of 15 and 49 years of age, 7.3% were underweight. 34% of 15 to 19-year-old pregnant females are most vulnerable to malnourishment. Rates of food insecurity rise and fall seasonally, particularly in the rainy season between February and May. Also in the arid and semi-arid regions, adequate nutrition is scarce. Poor families in urban areas often experience acute food insecurity, resulting in skipped meals and going to bed hungry. Most Tanzanians eat what they get, not what they need. Today, I'm going to tell you a story about community, friendship, and hope. It began in 2011 with a group of North American students traveling to Tanzania for a service learning trip. Something incredible happened in those 2 weeks that literally changed the trajectory of my life. I found the Tanzanian people to be hospitable, humble, resourceful, caring, witty, and real. The beauty of what I experienced in that short visit breathed life into a dormant dream of creating an international exchange program. With the support of my academic administrators, I began to explore and develop the possibilities. Since that time, I have taken 19 North American students to learn and volunteer in Tanzania. They have collectively given over 2,000 hours of service learning, primarily with children and youth. North American students' lives have been transformed in the process. Thanks to social media, ongoing social relationships exist between the North American students and Tanzanian youth. In the spirit of equity, I have also brought 16 Tanzanian young adults to Maine. Among them is Skarian, who has been involved in the Maine Hunger Dialogue activities since 2016. But this is not my story. It is a story of community, friendship, and hope. And the story was written with the vision and commitment of my extended family and community in Tanzania. Most farm operations and food production is done by hand in Tanzania. No hands are too small to help in food preparation. Next slide. Yeah. Nutrition is artfully combined with culture and presentation of favorites. Next one. In this community, food is used to generate income, as Mama Pili does in her small shop to provide meals for university students. Celebrations of many occasions bring food, friends, and family together. Student achievement, tradition, holidays, and graduation. We have a couple of clips to share with you now featuring one of our own, Shafi. He is in his final year of laboratory science studies at KCMC Hospital. His first passion is music, and he has composed a short song about food security. Following that, he will share with you the work of the youth supporting the children at Tumaini Orphans Home. So you can play the music.
Having a little bit of difficulty with the clip. Hold on one second, Shirley.
Food is secure, secure my life, preserve my energy for the better future. Food is secure, secure my life, preserve my energy for the better future. We need to protect our land, we need to preserve our plants, we need to secure the animal for the fertilizer. Food is secure, secure my life, preserve my energy for the better future.
And then you can just go to the next one.
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Shafi from Moose, Tanzania, and I'm here to share my thoughts about food production and security in my community where I live in, to Land of Us Home. We just do production for food purpose, not for selling because of different variety problem include capital. So we just concentrate on security of getting food. Okay, our schedule starts from December up to March. That period is for prepare the farm and the plant. On September we just harvest them. So after harvest them we just do two stage, first stage and second stage, primary and secondary. Primary we just sort out and cleaning for harvest ones, and the second stage we just store them into place that cannot be attacked by insects. We just do two crops for food, like is maize and the beans. So that's how we do in our community. So we store them so we can utilize for 6 months up to 7 months. So that's why we store the food in a good place, like use tanks or rooms that cannot be attacked by insects. Or we spray some insecticide so to prevent those insects to attack the food. Thank you.
Moderators, I see that I'm out of time. Can I finish my presentation, or do we need to cut now? I can go. Thank you, Frank. I hope that the strength, courage, and commitment that you have seen in these slides today has inspired you. If home is where the heart lives, then community is where the heart gives. Hunger is a serious, potentially life-threatening and preventable condition. We may have no control over economic downturns, global pandemics, and in the short term, climatic disasters. But every day, we can choose what we do with what we have. If, like the fable of stone soup, we come together, someone can fetch water, another can make the fire. This one will bring a carrot, and that one a cabbage. Not only will we have food to nourish and sustain us, the spirit of community, coming together, sharing, laughing, breaking bread, will carry us through the most troubling times. Asanteni, thank you, Tuko Pamoja.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And you know, as we wind down to our last few minutes together, I just want to mention a few things and remind people of a few things. We have the link to the resource page. It was posted here, but it's on the Maine Hunger Dialogue website. We're going to be adding new resources because things either came up today, or we also welcome the participants to send us resources, and we would be happy to add those. It was really wonderful to be able to do this, and thanks so much to our moderators and our IT tech surge behind the scenes. You know, there were a few technical problems, but we did it, and we shared and presented everything that we had intended to. Of course, we would have preferred to be here together, and hopefully the plan right now is that the next year's Maine Hunger Dialogue will be an in-person event for a day and a half at the University of Maine in Farmington. In previous years, we've been able to get some funding and keep the costs really low for students and even help you with your housing. So we hope we'll be able to do that and be together next year. We've mentioned the grant program, and I've been dialing for dollars. And to date, I have been able to raise $5,500, which is enough right now to fund 11 of these $500 grants. The application for those grants is going to go up live today on the Maine Hunger Dialogue website. So, and there's going to be a rolling period of grants. So right now when you get to it, you'll see the first set of deadlines for projects, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, because we want those folks to be able to get started. But we're likely going to have an additional round of grants and another application period. You do have to be the grants all have to go to institutions of higher learning with students and staff working together. And you do have to have participated in today's Maine Hunger Dialogue to be eligible. Shirley and I are also trying to come up with a creative way to fund one of these grants for our friends in Tanzania. So I also want to remind everybody that this event has been recorded, and not everybody who registered was here today, but they will all of you who registered will get a link when it becomes available, probably within the next week, and you'll be able to watch and share this recording. We hope that a lot of college students will and professors and staff will encourage their as appropriate to incorporate this into your classroom learning and do more studies. All the questions that were not answered today, we will capture them, and we do have your contacts and your email. And sorry we didn't get to them all, but we will answer them later. I think that is really all I have, except just to really, again, thank everybody, all the participants and panelists and everybody that helped. I don't know if any of my other colleagues have anything else that they want to add, but I certainly welcome you to do so as we close.
Frank, I just wanted to clarify when you said that people needed to participate in order to be eligible for the grants, that will include registered participants who watch the video later.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you had registered and weren't here live today, or even if people register, I think the registration, we're going to double check on that, but our intent is to keep the registration link open for another week or two, so that people that are just learning about it now can still register, and then you'll get the link and you'll be able to watch it, and we'll have your it'll go into our database, so we'll know that you participated. So we want to make it as broadly available, but it is restricted for those of you outside of Maine. I'm sorry that these projects are restricted to colleges and universities and community colleges and within the state of Maine. So with that, I think we can come to a close. Again, I just want to thank everybody, and hopefully we can all be together in person. But I look forward to the grants and continuing this collaboration, because that's what keeps us going. It becomes a year-long event, not just a webinar you sat in on for 2 hours today. So stay with us, network, and let's keep it going. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Frank, for your leadership.
Thank you.